Well, thank you very much to all our speakers. We are running way over time, but Will here, who's chairing the next session, has given me a few extra minutes. I'd like to take a question just from the floor first here in the room. Yes? Do we have microphones on their way? Thank you. Please say your name.
Sarah Bell, farmer from Rutland. It seems to me that with both the Labour and Conservative parties advocating maintaining the need to hold spending at its current level, there is no good reason not to write this into the agricultural bill. Would you share with us, Mr Gove, your logic for resisting it and not giving the industry a multi-annual framework which will give us, as farmers, the confidence to invest, innovate and take on the opportunities of both Brexit and the digital revolution?
Thank you for your question. There's a lot of support for a multi-annual framework. My colleague Philip Dunn raised this, as David knows, in committee. One of the constraints that I face, I hope I was honest about it in the speech, is that the Treasury very rarely, before a spending review, wants to make any sort of commitment which could be interpreted as it having its own hands tied. We've already secured from the Treasury, again, as I mentioned in my speech, a greater degree of commitment for farming than for a number of other areas of government expenditure. But I think what we need to do, and I'm very conscious of my responsibility here, is to work to ensure not just that the Treasury understand this argument and that we can have greater security and continuity of funding, but also that we build a broader consensus. Because David and I think, broadly share, not in every respect, but a similar commitment to ensuring that there is spending there, not just to support food production and the rural economy, but also to invest in the environment and natural capital as well. And one of the long-term aims of the policy that I've set out is a desire to do two things. To impress upon other parts of the government that if we're going to have an industrial strategy that works, then we need to make sure that our biggest industry, which is food and drink, is at the heart of it, and that we need to invest in productivity there. But also, when we're investing in the countryside and in farming and food production, we're also investing in the environment in a way which ensures that we hand on our stock of natural capital in an enhanced state to the next generation. And that means, I believe, that you can maximise the level of public support, durable public support, for the level of investment that we currently have. And I think that as well as making the argument to the Treasury, we need to have a broader public conversation in order to ensure that whatever political party is in power, or whoever happens to be Prime Minister or Chancellor of the Exchequer, that the public would not accept a diminution in the support that we give to the countryside, to the environment and to food production.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask you a yes-no question?
Yes.
Is that 3.2 billion under threat?
No.
Promise.
Well, it's certainly... It's guaranteed until the end of this Parliament. And I think I've said before that actually, I said on the BBC, that we need to try and make the case for more investment. But we can only make the case for more investment if we ally it both with an embrace of reform, I talked about the industrial strategy earlier, and also if we can demonstrate the public goods that, that farming provides, which the market won't pay for, but which the public should.
David.
Well, we have committed to keeping the money there, and for two good reasons. This is a huge change. This is much bigger than the changes in 75 and 95. 2005, and I oversaw that and some of the mess we made of the area payments scheme because we didn't pilot it. I mean, I could have gone on about the need to pilot, you know, these environmental land management schemes. I mean, so I think we have to be cross-party, put pressure on the Treasury to get the agreement that we're not going to just take the money away, not necessarily in one great lump, but you know what'll happen, death by 1,000 cuts. I think the second fact is that we have to recognise there's a whole series of consequences. I mean, I'm very interested, as I always have been, and some of you will know, with tenancy reform. The government committed themselves to the TRIG agenda in 2016. Sadly, that's just slipped by the way. We need to get back into play, and you can only do that if you've got the security of funding. So that's why I make the offer. We'll find a way in the legislation of securing, without fettering any future government, so it feels feels it has to come up with this streamlined arrangement, but we will find a way, if the government are prepared to reach out, of guaranteeing the funding. And there's no better place to do that than in the legislation itself.
I'm going to take another, because we're very short of time, I'm going to take another question from the floor. Gentleman here at the front, if I could have a mic here. Thank you.
Brian Thomas, Farmers Union of Wales. As we got a devolved agriculture, Minister, will there be a common agricultural policy for the UK? Right, and also, will any support that will be available, will it be ring-fenced? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there are three things I would say. The first thing is in terms of support. Lord Bew, whom I mentioned briefly earlier in my speech, is conducting a review of future allocations within the UK. And it's explicitly designed to look at the different geography and topography, the different socioeconomic factors in each of the nations of the United Kingdom. And it's deliberately designed to ensure that we recognise that the greater preponderance of upland farming in Wales and Scotland, the greater preponderance of less favoured areas, and also the fact that in Northern Ireland there are a larger number of smaller farms, particularly livestock farms. All of these create additional pressures. So it's there to ensure that we can distribute funding fairly. Now, of course, when we give funding to any devolved administration, that devolved administration must decide how it's going to be spent, but we do believe that it's critically important to maintain a UK-wide single market and to have UK-wide frameworks, and indeed all the devolved administrations recognise that on things like animal health, we absolutely need to have a unified framework. The final thing that I would say is that obviously it is up to each of the devolved administrations, as I mentioned earlier, how to change the way in which they allocate that payment. But I do want to say that I've been very heartened by the progressive way in which the Welsh Labour government in particular have worked with us in order to ensure through the Agriculture Bill that we have a framework that works for everyone. The Scottish government's taken a slightly different approach, but to be fair to Fergus Ewing, he's been very pragmatic on a day-to-day basis in the way in which he's operated. So I think that devolution is working, and it's up to all of us to make sure that it continues to work.
We do have a question from the East Room, and as if by magic, I think we are supposed to be having a live link to the East Room. Oh, yes, and I think we have a question from there, please. Thank you.
Hello, Eurovision. Can you hear me? This is Oxford.
I think you get 12 points for that. Well done.
My name's Joe Stanley. I'm a farmer from Leicestershire, and I'm on the OFC Emerging Leaders Programme this year. My question is to Mr. Gove. Would you acknowledge the stark dichotomies that are inherent in the Agriculture Bill? For example, the highest possible domestic standards, which will inevitably undercut by imports, as admitted by you at Conservative Party conference. More healthy British fruit and veg, whilst cutting off our vital EU labour, but also healthier soils, whilst penalising farmers for using things like farmyard manure in the clean air strategy. At least, I would argue, Margaret Beckett was honest in 2003 when she said, we don't need domestic food production in this country anymore, which you could argue is what we're seeing in your Agriculture Bill. So again, will you acknowledge that there are inherent dichotomies in your Agriculture Bill?
No. But I do think that there are always potential tensions. But the important thing to do is to recognise how you can reconcile those tensions and to turn tensions into synergies. So it is the case that, as I mentioned in my speech, that for a variety of reasons, organic manure is a good thing, not least in generating a high level of organic content in our soil. But if you don't make sure that slurry management is properly done, then you do create an air pollution problem. And it is not, I think, incongruous to recognise that there are strong benefits from using organic manure, but also that there are some farmers who should manage their slurry better. It's not an either-or, it's a recognition of a physical reality. In the same way, I think that strong animal welfare and environmental standards for UK production are both a mark of excellence, which secures us a competitive edge, and a wise investment for the future in making sure that we have as I mentioned earlier, a resilient stock of natural capital on which to draw in the future. And I also think it's clear that we are not going to reduce our standards in pursuit of a short-term trade deal. I think that one of the challenges for all of us is to try to overcome the tendency to see everything in terms of a dichotomy. To say, on the one hand, there are farmers driven completely by a desire to maximize food production, come what may, and on the other hand, there are environmentalists who regard farmers as somehow an impediment to the effective cultivation and stewardship of our countryside. If we put people in those two armed camps, then we won't be able to make progress. And one of the points I tried to make in my speech is that areas like the promise of new technology provide us with an opportunity to both increase food production and recognize how we can improve and enhance our natural environment, and that it's important that we embrace those technologies, even when, like gene editing, there are some well-organized lobbies who are critical of them, because this technology has the capacity to unite both our desire to ensure that we can play a bigger role in global food production and our imperative to ensure that we steward our natural environment more carefully.
Could I just gauge the feeling of people in front of us as to whether you feel the environment and farming are still, in your head, separate entities, or that this dichotomy can be overcome, that actually both can work together and things can improve? How many of you feel positive that this dichotomy, as was put in the question, can be overcome? How many of you think not? Just a few. Okay, thank you very much indeed. We're going on to a question from Twitter. Reading University graduate and farmer Matt Atwood asks, how far Whitehall has got in putting an actual monetary value on public goods. All the farmers here will be asked to contribute to public goods.
Yes.
They will receive funding for that. But how much, and have you worked out how much a clump of trees is worth?
It's priceless, as they say in the ads. No, one of the reasons why we are following on from David's point, running pilots, is that we want to be in a position where we can properly value the work that farmers do, which is not properly valued at the moment. Again, we have a budget of £3.2 billion overall, which goes into agriculture, into rural development, and into the rural economy. What we want to do is to make sure that we can find an appropriate way of pricing some of the public goods that we all value.
So you haven't worked it out yet?
No, we are working it out, I think it's fairer to say. But by definition, if I were to draw up now a list of values that we attribute to specific outcomes or processes, what I wouldn't be doing is doing what we've pledged to do, which is to work with farmers and land managers themselves in order to design schemes that they consider to be appropriate for the specific environments and specific farm businesses for which they're responsible.
So you need them to tell you how valuable these things are.
Well, I think
some input from the farmers.
I think it's less a case of one side telling the other, and more a case of making sure that we can develop fair prices, appropriate contracts, and also at the same time learn from some of the payment by results pilots that have already been run, and also learn from some of the, even though they've been woefully mismanaged, some of the good things in environmental and countryside stewardship schemes of the past. Okay,
a question to Minette and to others. How does the UK compare to other countries on agriculture? Are we doing enough to be considered world leaders? Here we are with our subject, world of opportunity. How big are we in the world? And are we wrong at thinking that we're going to be a massive world player in the global food chain?
Well, I hope I outlined, the need for us to have a plan for the future. There's no point in having a goal if you don't have a plan. It's just a dream. And yes, we are well placed. Right now, I think we are really well placed. We have a massive home population, which really is the prize jewel. It is the envy of the world. You've only got to speak to Argentinian farmers, New Zealand farmers who are here, and they all want access to this market. So there is a real critical need to keep our farmers and growers the #1 supplier of choice where possible, to the UK market. And there are opportunities, massive opportunities, within export markets. But those opportunities have been available to us. And we actually have been under-exporting for years. If I look at us compared to Denmark, compared to Ireland, compared to Germany, those countries have been aggressive exporters. That has been within our gift. Now, we haven't chosen to take it, partly because of the size of the home market. But there is a real opportunity on this leadership point, and this is why I think the AMR point is so fundamental to the future, that if we can get the standards piece enshrined in some form of legislation, even a commitment by the Secretary of State to pull a UK-wide group together to look at what we want on animal welfare, environmental protection, and food safety, a commitment to bring that group together, there is a massive opportunity. The biggest threat to us, the biggest threat to the environment, is that actually we decide to import cheap raw ingredients and add value to them under the Union Jack. Now, I will fight that to the death. That is A1 critical right now. We're in a good place, massive opportunity, but get that bit wrong, Anna, and it really will not work. So I will keep saying it, and we will see what happens in the next few months.
What do you say to that? Do you see that as a threat?
I don't think it's a threat, but I do think that Minette's offer is one that we should take up. I think that going right back to the discussions over TTIP, which preceded our decision to leave the European Union, one of the concerns that was raised then was the concern specifically with respect to the United States of America, that TTIP would mean that we would have to lower some of our own standards and protections. And the two particular, they're a proxy for wider concerns, the two particular foods which were in the headlines were chlorine-washed chicken and hormone-enhanced beef. And I've been clear, but I know that there is more that must be done, that we don't intend to lower our standards. We don't intend to, because that would lead to uncertainty for the consumer, and it would also undermine the strength of our own domestic production and also the reputation that it enjoys. Now, there are different ways in which we can provide the reassurance and the guarantees and the security that Minette and others rightly ask for, and we'll be coming forward with more proposals about how we might do that. But I think that there's a broader issue as well, which Minette is right to raise, which is that this is always going to be an ongoing debate. And therefore, we need to consider both how we look at labelling and how we look at other protections in order to ensure that the consumer has guarantees that we won't have material entering the food chain which is inappropriate, low standard, and potentially unhealthy, but also how they can, in an increasingly discerning consumer market, feel greater confidence about what they buy and the provenance and quality of what they eat. And I certainly think that this is something that we should do in partnership with food producers across the United Kingdom and with other interested parties.
Let's take another question from in the room. Thank you. Right at the back there.
Peter Clark from the West Country. I'd like to take up on Minette Batter's very bold statement. Turn off the tap of agriculture and you'll never turn it on again. There are quite a few of us in this room who probably can remember the last war. We don't want to repeat that. And we're going, if we do lower the standards and we do turn the tap off, we're beholden to every fanatic there is in the world. Please, please, listen to Minette. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we might have another question from next door. No? Okay, fine. We're going to ask another question from the app then. You say, Mr. Gove, that Brexit gives the UK access to technology the EU is turning its back on. Does that include GM crops?
It's specifically, I think...
Gene editing.
I'm specifically referring to gene editing there. I think that everyone in this room will appreciate that there's a distinction between GM and gene editing, that GM involves DNA from other species being introduced into whatever it is that you're manipulating. Gene editing is simply a process of, well, it's not simple, but in essence, it's simply a process of accelerating what selective breeding, what evolution can produce anyway. And I think that, of course, there are going to be some ethical and some economic questions that we do need to resolve, but I think that it has the potential for dramatic improvements in what we generate. And we're privileged to have Norman Borlaug's granddaughter with us here. There were criticisms in the past of what he was seeking to do. But I think now most of us would recognise that the Green Revolution, which he was responsible for, was, if not an unmitigated good, certainly one of the best things to happen in the 20th century in terms of providing people in the developing world with access to high-quality food. Now, of course, when this new technology is being developed, we do have to be, as I say, ethically vigilant, but it can be potentially transformative. And I think it's important that we don't allow the well-organized lobbying of some groups that in the past have been resistant to technology almost as a matter of faith to divert the debate away from the real potential as well as the real challenges that gene editing and other technologies can bring.
Does that mean there would be more investment from the government in R&D in
Yes.
the places that say that Clive mentioned?
Yes, I think it's absolutely critical that we do. I think that I mean, there are several things to say. The first thing is, I mentioned briefly the strength of our agricultural universities and also the faculties and departments and other universities that cover this landscape. We do need to make sure that they have the investment and support required. We do need to provide the right environment for agri-tech investment overall, and there will be R&D spend that we will commit in this area. And also, institutions like Rothamsted have been world leading for over a century now, and we do need to make sure that we don't undermine the work that they're doing. I should say that I'm very privileged to have an amazing array of talented people working alongside me in DEFRA and in the DEFRA family. But Ian Boyd, our Chief Scientific Advisor, I think is one of the most distinguished public servants in Whitehall today. And one of the things that he has helped keep me in the department focused on is the potential of scientific innovation to achieve far more in terms of food production, and also at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, in environmental enhancement. And just one thing, just to the gentleman from the West Country who made his point earlier, I think the challenges that we'll face in the future are very different from the challenges that we faced in the past. But, as I mentioned again briefly in my speech, because of climate change, there are parts of the world which have played a significant part in food production, which will face real challenges in the future. And I think there's an opportunity for Britain to step up and for us to play potentially an even greater role in world food production in the future. But that relies on us embracing the opportunity that technology provides in order to sustainably increase yield and productivity here in the UK.
We're going to end with a question from the other room. Hello.
Clive Bailey, farmer, founder of the Farming Forum and OFC 19 emerging leader. The challenges and technology and the changes to farming systems that are going to be needed for this fourth agricultural revolution to take place will require re-education for many farmers. Farmer-to-farmer knowledge transfer will be critical to that. How will future agricultural policy support this?
Re-education.
Well, I think there are two things. Re-education sounds vaguely sort of Cambodian. Yeah. But I think
continuing education.
Continuing education, continuous development. I think there are two things to say. The first thing is that organisations like the Prince's Countryside Fund, which we've supported in the past and I hope that we will support in the future, do a very good job in bringing together those farmers who may, for a variety of reasons, partly because of the scale of their farm enterprise, partly because of geographical location, they may find it more difficult than some to have access to the sort of information and the knowledge transfer that's necessary in order to keep businesses competitive. Government needs to make sure that we support networks and organisations like those. The other thing also is, and I talked again briefly about some of the work that's being undertaken by Minette, Peter Kendall, Don Curry, Fiona Kendrick and others, to look at farming education in the future. And I think that the two things that I would say is that we need to make sure, it's already the case that we're in a strong position, but we need to make sure that the next generation of people coming to work in farming and food production recognise that it's one of the most scientifically exciting and academically rigorous areas of future industrial growth in this country, and that agriculture should be seen as another STEM subject, and that we should recognise that working in agriculture, farming and food production is something that people should aspire to do, because they recognise not just that it's our biggest manufacturing industry with huge potential for growth, but also that your influence on the life of the nation, on the health and well-being of our citizens and on the shape of our landscape is profound. And I think that we in DEFRA have a role to play in making sure that people realise that in the future, farming should be seen as an increasingly aspirational professional career pathway. And there are things that we can do to work with perhaps with some of the, not just the university institutions, but also significant commercial players to reinforce that.
Thank you. Minette and David, I know you'd like to talk a little bit about this. This is our final answer, so.
Absolutely, so I'll try and keep it brief. Look, I think this is a real area for AHDB, and I bear probably some of the scars for being a Southwest farmer. The Southwest always wears its heart on its sleeve and is very quick to tell you if you are in the right or wrong. And nothing annoys farmers more than being told they've got to become more competitive, increase their productivity, and they don't feel the value of that within their own farming businesses. And all too often, that is what has happened. So with our response to the AHDB review, we've made it very clear that we feel it should have two platforms, actually, one around business development, skills, making our industry more resilient, more competitive, but the other about market development. And my God, in the future, do we really need to market the hell out of what we're doing? And that is where we failed in the past. That is why I want Michael Gove to be our brand ambassador. You've got to do both, because nothing annoys farmers more than just telling them, actually, they've got to sort out productivity and they've got to get better. Why, when they don't get the benefits from it? So it's about a two-pronged approach, and that is how you will deliver a step change.
David.
I mean, if the bill becomes an act, then if the policy paper that accompanies the bill at the moment is to be believed, then in 2021, you will get quite dramatic cuts in the basic payment. Now, that's 2 years away, and some people are going to have to completely reorientate the way in which they do their farming. Again, the critique that we advanced on the bill committee was, who is going to advise? Where is the independent access to that advice? And at the moment, it's not at all clear, and people are going to have to make really difficult business decisions, let alone whether they want to farm as they may want to carry on at the moment. These are going to be hard-faced business decisions, and they need to have access to independent advice. It isn't at all clear where that's going to come from.
Where is that going to come from?
Well, I think
can the government help with
yes,
that?
I think it can. But I think there are different sources of independent advice. I think I mentioned earlier there are organisations like the Prince's Countryside Fund. It's also the case that there are, through the AHDB, through the NFU, through the Farmers Union of Wales, there is a stock and a reservoir of expertise. It is also the case, I think, that if we look at some of the professional development that's offered by places like the Royal Agricultural University and some of the programmes that they run, there is an opportunity there. But I do recognise that the challenge which David is right to draw attention to is particularly acute for some sectors. And it's particularly acute, and I think I touched on this earlier, it's not exclusively restricted to, but particularly acute for smaller farmers and smaller livestock farmers in particular. And we're very conscious of the fact that that's where the shoe is pinching tightest, potentially.
Thank you all very, very much indeed. I'm afraid we have now run out of time. Rather like the Today programme, you know, the pips are squeaking. Thank you very much to Michael Gove, Minette Batters, David Drew and Clive Black. Thank you.